All right, let's listen to this one. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Is this, you did number 2 today, correct?
Yes, we did.
All right. I thought I would catch up and we would do 1 and 2 today. Similar themes. Luther actually combined these two and split up number 10, coveting, into 2. I don't know what gives him the right to rearrange the 10 commandments, but apparently he was rearranging the church, so he thought he would take a shot at the 10 commandments too. So the Supreme Court once stated that some of the 10 commandments are okay and some of them are not, which is kind of an awkward thing when you have tainted human nature deciding which parts of the Word of God are applicable and are not applicable. Okay? I don't know. I did a lot of research and I was a little bit shocked to find that there's not a lot of dialogue about the first commandment. He's God or he's not. Okay? I mean, he is God anyways. Is God the authority over your life? Is he the dominant factor? Okay? When you make a conscious decision about something, is God the governing body over how you choose, what you say, etc.? All right? Is he the controlling influence? This is what it means to, you will have no other gods before me. I am your God. And really, humanity has a inborn religious instinct. I think I read this week that we're down to 81% of the population believes there's a God. Did anybody else see that? 81%. It used to be 90%, but there's a lot of, the new generation is coming up, trained, there is no God, believing there is no God, and there is no God, So, sadly, we see that as a negative, but maybe it's positive that there's a void in people's lives that we can bring spiritual life to. We always have to turn things around to see the opportunity, not the problem. But humanity's always had this religious instinct. Edmund Burke said man is by constitution a religious animal. Cicero said there's a seed of religion planted in every one. And maybe that's because you and I have been made in the image of God. We just kind of know. When you stand and see the radical vistas of nature, you just think, God. You're in a foxhole, God. You're on your hospital bed, God. Okay? You heard about the little boy who thought that God lived in his bathroom because he'd always hear Dad get up and say, God, are you still in there? Okay. Guess he was frustrated with the amount of time his wife was in there. I don't know. There's a lot of competition to the authority that drives your life. Okay? When the 10 Commandments were given, they were basically in contrast to the various cultures surrounding them. Okay, I'm your God, and we have a different way of sex rules, food rules, law rules, ways of thinking, how you treat people. Following me, we're going to do it different than the rest of the societies around you. One time I attacked the Leviticus laws, all that awkward stuff, don't eat shellfish, don't have a polyester cotton blend, and all the things that people get all offensive about the Lord. And it was fascinating to realize just how evil the other cultures were. Okay? Just how bad in behavior-wise these other cultures were just, wow. God comes along and says, you're going to be a lot different than them. And suddenly you could see the difference between God's people, or you were supposed to see the difference between God's people and the rest of the world. And speaking of the rest of the world, there was a polytheism, a belief in many gods. The Egyptians, they had the moon god, the sun god, the sea god, the fire god, the wind god, the fertility god. Lots of cultures had fertility gods. We're going to get into the Baal worship. Just everybody, all kinds of gods. I think Hinduism has, lots of gods. They make a god out of everything, okay? Then there's henotheism. That's each nation had a god. So Israel had their god, and the Edomites had their god, and the Assyrians had their god, and everybody had their own god. And so a lot of times there was a battle of gods when the Egyptians and the Israelis had the showdown with the 10 plagues. It really was a showdown of the gods, the Egyptians' gods versus the Israelite God. All right. When the Assyrians took over the lands, and what they would do is they would take these people and put them over there, and take those people and bring them over here, and then those folks are going, oh, we don't know the customs of the God of this land. And so they sent a Hebrew priest back to show them how to deal with the God of this land. All right? And that's where the Assyrians made a huge blunder. What God is there? No other God's been able to stop us. What God will stop us from conquering you? Well, he said that to the living God, and 185,000 soldiers didn't wake up the next morning. Okay? Just to let you know who is God. I'm different than all the other nations that you conquered. And so then we have monotheism, one God who rules the earth. And really there's, the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims. We were monotheists. We believe there is one God. I remember being just struck with the thought that if you had to choose between being an atheist or being a Muslim, you would probably want to be a Muslim because you believe in God versus you don't believe in God. And that was just really a wild thought. Oh my goodness, one or the other, you want to go with God. And so, besides, they had Jesus in there. It's so fascinating to me that when I talk to Muslims, they always bring up their Jesus. And in a lot of Muslim situations, they quietly lean on Jesus for healing. That's the part of their faith where they go and find him. So I find that fascinating. But the Lord's basically saying, have no other gods before me, besides me, except me. Okay, that's what he's saying. I'm the only one. And I just read through Isaiah, Jeremiah, I'm in Ezekiel right now, and it's just real clear. I'm God, nobody else. That's who it is, who I am. And here's where it gets interesting. When people believe in God, they'll try to be like the God they believe in. Okay? If you have a kind God, you're going to be kind. If you're going to have a grace God, you're going to be full of grace. If you're going to have a judgmental God, you're going to be judgmental. Okay? You're like the God you serve. And what's intriguing is when you're going through Genesis and you get into Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, it's pretty quickly that all of a sudden God says, he addresses the Baals. Okay? And the Ashtoreth. And the Baals were a force. It's a force, a life force that brings vegetation up from the ground. It was the primary God of the Old Testament in terms of, Elijah in 800 BC had to get them to stop worshiping the Baals. Moses in 1400 BC, same issue. This was like a part of the landscape of, you might have your own gods, but you worship Baal, the life force that would get you food. It's interesting because in Hosea 2:8, Israel did not know I was the one who gave her grain, wine, and oil. What do we see happening here? they're attributing to Baal and the life force, we got our vegetation needs met by him rather than God. And God's going, no, it was me. Okay? And this unseen force, it's kind of what's behind the thought of evolution, that we came from pond scum rather than the mind of God. You see, when God steps in and goes, I created you. Otherwise, we just feel like the life force brought about one amoeba who met another amoeba, and they came together, and over millions of years we became, I've just been reading about the Neanderthal man, okay? Just read about him yesterday for a while, and just interesting. You get all caught up into it, and you finally go, okay, wait a minute, no, I don't think we evolved that way. I think God, wherever God stepped in, whether he made Adam and Eve, which I believe he did, or he decided this is the moment that I'm going to drop my spirit into the Cro-Magnon man, and Adam and Eve became living souls instead of animals. But that's a whole different Bible study that we're not going to get into today, okay? Here's the real issue with Baal. The power that gets children. Sex. The sex force. And so, part of worshiping Baal was, sex. I mean, can you imagine what an attractive evangelism tool this would be? Okay? We have two sacraments, communion and baptism, right? Well, they have three sacraments. I'm making a joke here, and sex is one of them. You get to go to the temple prostitutes, and you get to, participate in these orgies, and you add drunkenness and gluttony to it, and welcome to Baal worship. Okay? Kind of exciting. So, you can see as it appeals to the base nature why everybody would go that way. God comes along and says, I'm going to close down the base nature and lift you up out of it into treating people differently and having your wife and having me as your source for agriculture and having me as your worship object. It's all, and what's cool about, we think, oh, God just wants worship. He wants us to be in awe of how much he loves us, how much he provides for us, how much he cares about us. When he's asking us to worship him, he's going, hey, look how much I love you. Okay? It's not like some guy who just is a, megalomaniac going, oh, I want attention here. No. He's like, hey, I want you to recognize how much I love you. Let's step forward together. Okay? Well, as I mentioned, you're going to be like the God you believe in. Okay? If you believe in a licentious God, you're going to become licentious. If you believe in a stern, hard God, the chances are you're going to be a stern, hard individual. And that can be a difficult Christian to deal with. Okay? They break a lot of tender souls, a lot of wounded people when you bring that harsh judgment. And you can basically just, would Jesus come up to a broken person with judgment, or would he come down and drop to a knee and put his hand on them and release, love and healing and empower them to overcome? You see different. My opinion of Jesus is Hebrews 1:3, he's the exact representation of the nature of God. So how did Jesus handle people? The only people he was rough on were the religious leaders who put barriers between God and the people, who created rules to separate God from the people, who made it impossible to make your way to God unless you were perfect. And even when they were perfect lifestyle, they didn't have the right heart. So, Jesus says, don't commit adultery. I say, don't even think about it. He goes deeper, So, I don't know, talking about stern people, I remember one time I did a funeral and we're at the graveside, and when we're at the graveside, we had just buried this woman that was difficult to do her funeral because she left a legacy of pain behind her, this Christian woman. And we're at the graveside, and all of a sudden this huge amount of thunder and lightning strikes, and the husband goes, she's arrived. Okay. He was like, wow. So, here we have a God, and then a lot of people get all upset about the fact that he's a jealous God. When does somebody get jealous? When they care. You know, you're giving that person more attention than me. Man, I'm connected to you, and you're not even giving me the time of day. One time I come home, and my mother has a homeless person in the house, and we're going to have dinner together, and you know, he's probably been drinking, and he starts to have a theological conversation, and I'm a young Christian, but a biblical Christian, you know, young biblical Christian. And he's like, what is God jealous? How can he be a good God if he's a jealous God? And that was my first interaction with somebody bringing up having a problem with God being jealous. And ever since that moment, I've noticed people get really offended that God is jealous. You know, I had a couple of friends that were swingers. Okay, and you know what swingers are, right? They're not the guys out on the playground on the swings. They share their partners with other people, and you're like, whoa, no, you don't want your precious spouse to do that, you know? This is our territory exclusively. And so when, you know, the God says, hey, me and you have an exclusive relationship. I want to be your God, your provider, the one who cares for you, you know, the one that does life with you. I'm jealous when you give my gifts away to some other God and attribute to him, you know, what I have given to you. So, you know, God, he's jealous for your affections and for your heart. This is what, it's so personal. I'll just never forget Moses. Love the Lord your God. He's commanding them to emotionally get connected to the Lord. That's what it's about. It's not about following a bunch of rules. It's about stepping into the relationship. And what's amazing is as you step into the relationship and you pursue him, suddenly you start to experience God in the most amazing ways. Okay? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay? So, yeah. I'm one of those guys that really believes in that falling in love. You know, one of my ways of closing up a prayer is to say, Lord, we love you. And I was a leader in the presbytery. I would go to other churches and give talks and, you know, have, you know, functions that I would have to be at. And it was in my habit back then to close up a prayer that way. And it was so interesting to see how many people struggled with that statement. You know, technically, we love the Lord, but that's not affection. I mean, I was dealing with the older generation, right? They don't even say I love you to their own kids. And so they're not going to say I love you to God either. I thought that was kind of weird. But anyways. Here's the deal. I think the most difficult competition for God is the self. Was that not the original sin? The self? You know, you can be God's. You don't have to be under his authority. You can be your own authority. You can call the shots in your life. You're not accountable to anybody else. Okay? But here's the problem. By neglecting God's authority, you forfeit God's care. And so something's got to give when you decide, I'll be God, rather than allowing him to be God. Now what's amazing about God is he will still care. He lets the rain fall on the good and the not good, the unjust, the just and the unjust. He cares about the unjust. He's pursuing all the horrible idol worshipers in Ezekiel right now. Go, hey guys, come on. Put that stuff aside and pursue me. He just loves his people even when they're really broken and fallen and messing up. And this leads us to the second commandment. No graven images. You know, in Isaiah 44, God makes fun of the people. He goes, you know, you chop down a tree and you cut it in half and you burn half of it and make your meal over it, and then the other half you carve it into an idol and then you bow down before it. He goes, where's the logic in that? Do you see how ridiculous this is? You and your idols. It's a piece of wood. It's a piece of gold. It's not a real thing. And idols, it's kind of weird because, it might be a object, but sometimes, it can be like in India. They have a huge problem with starvation issues, and they got 70 million cows wandering around the countryside because, they decided that, well, those are sacred, that's our sacred cow. And, McDonald's sees that as a great opportunity to feed people, and they see it as, the sacred cow. They do the same thing with monkeys and rats, and they have this, if you've ever seen videos of monkeys just coming into people's houses and completely disrupting them and killing the family dogs and everything because, hey, it could be an ancestor, and you're like, well, that's not the way God set it up, okay? He's primarily concerned with those made in his image, and we're to rule over the creation. And the creation has been made for our benefit in his image. Obviously, we want to take care of creation. However, I think sometimes when you make an idol out of something created rather than the creator, suddenly you get everything in your life out of balance. And you wonder, are there any images allowed? What about the cross? Anybody wearing a cross? Anne has a cross. Idol worship, okay? Is it, or is it a reminder of what Jesus has done for you? Is it, the Catholics, they have Jesus on the cross. The Protestants don't have him on the cross. They think he rose from the dead. He's not on the cross anymore. Hey, you don't have to take it off. I was just messing around.
I had it on wrong.
Okay. You had the wrong side on.
Yeah.
Right? The side that says made in China? Okay. I just read we're gonna celebrate with like 75 million flags that were made in China as we flag for the July 4th weekend. Anyways, so it's kind of weird because the crucifix is meant to be a representation of what Jesus has done for you. Okay. Sadly, it gets turned into a piece of jewelry. Except for the Christian, it means something to us. When we put our cross on, we're thinking, okay, hey, this is my source, my connection to God, my recognition of who he is in my life. But it's possible to take images too far. Back in Numbers, the people sinned, and God sent out fiery snakes, and they were biting people, and he had Moses create a pole, and he lifted up the pole, and anybody who was willing to look at the pole would be healed. Okay? And so, this is a big deal. It's a representation of what was to come, that Jesus was to be lifted up, and anybody who looks at him will survive the snake bite of sin. So, a lot of symbolism in this moment in Moses, foretelling what Jesus' ministry is going to be all about. However, many centuries later in 2 Kings, Hezekiah had to burn down the pole because everybody was worshiping the pole rather than the meaning behind the pole. You're not supposed to be focused on this. You're supposed to be focused on what God does for you. God is not to be, it's became idol worship is what they was trying to say. And a lot of people get upset about the Catholic Church because they have their saints, and saints are this beautiful example of Christianity that we ought to follow in their footsteps with their devotion and their commitment and their spiritual life. But suddenly when people pray to the saints rather than to the Lord, you got it, you've turned it into an idol. You've turned those great people into idols rather than just role models. There is one mediator between God and humanity, Jesus Christ. This is 1 Timothy, not William Lewis. Although I think I'd like to say that myself, okay? One mediator. It's not the saints. It's not the beautiful Mother Mary. It's Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, come to this world to unite all of us back to the Father. Okay? So, you know what else? We can make idols out of worship. You know, I grew up during worship wars. The old hymns versus the new praise songs. Oh my goodness. Was that ever just the biggest battle? In my first 3 churches, I instituted the screens and the contemporary worship, and you know, this service is contemporary, that one's traditional, and the traditional hated the Christians in the contemporary worship. I'm like, are you kidding me? You know? And you know, and when you get hated, you hate back, right? And so what was supposed to be this amazing way of connecting people to God in a language that they would prefer, in music that was beautiful, biblical, touching the heart of God, it was, you know, you're ruining the church. We want all those people to do it our way or not be here. So they went to non-denominational churches. And the traditional church died because they didn't grow and make adjustments for the new generation. Why? They made an idol out of worship. Okay, it can only be this way. Which, by the way, wasn't that way 100 years ago. It was different. 200 years ago, it was different. I just read today that back in 1600s, you did not celebrate Christmas in Massachusetts. You'd be thrown in jail. And 200 years later, they said, okay, you can celebrate it, but you're going to be frowned upon. Okay? We didn't even celebrate Christmas 300 years ago. So, you see what I'm saying? You can make an idol out of the wrong things. Well, one more. Jerome, he translated the Bible from Greek into Latin, and he called it the Vulgate, which is vulgar, the common language of the people, which then became the one true version of the sacred text. It's the common language for the common man. It's not the sacred text. But it became, for 1,000 years, you know, off limits. And you can just see how suddenly, I got somebody in my Bible study right now, if it's not the King James, it doesn't count. You know? I'm like, oh, gosh. You do realize modern scholars, I don't care what scholars say. I know what the Bible says. The King James isn't in the Bible, okay? You know, we have such a grandiose access to Greek language now that we can understand how to communicate most accurately. It's the King James. It's like, all right, you know, if you want to die on that hill, if you want to make the King James this, you know, and it's, you know, whatever. Why don't you just apply the King James and show love to somebody else who has a New American Standard Bible? Okay, there's an idea. You know, but you can just see how people will just immediately. An idol is an object of excessive devotion, and here's where now it starts to get personal. Suddenly, okay. What do you excessively think about? It could be a person. It could be a sport. It could be a fantasy life. It could be your workaholism. Okay? Materialism, the life of leisure, your security. Have you ever noticed how people live for their security? You know, and there's no risk, there's no joy, there's just not stepping into life because it might not be safe. And you know, if we're not careful, we're just asking God to bless our idols if we don't make sure that He is the number one drive in our life. Listen to 2 Peter 2:19. By that which a man is overcome, that he is enslaved. Okay? So you get enslaved to that which basically becomes your overriding, consuming perspective. Well, I used to house sit, and it would be interesting. I went to this one house, I kid you not, I counted. They had 47 paintings, pictures, sculptures, everything you could imagine. Cats. Cats. You know, I had a regular gig there, you know. I shouldn't talk about them because I got paid well. But, you know, I had to take care of, I was there because I had to take care of the cats. And not only was there the cats, there was the 47 depictions of cats in the house. You know, I could see 7 or 8. But 47, you know? Yeah. And I want to say this too about, you know, the Bible. I'm a Bible thumper. I read the Bible every day. I love the Bible. I love the God of the Bible. Oh my goodness. But, you know, when I was a younger man, you know, the Bible kind of became an idol for me. And I had to learn that the letter of the law was not as important as the spirit of the law. Because there's a place in 1 Corinthians 5 that says, do not even eat with a sinful Christian. And Galatians 6:1 says, you know, go restore the sinful Christian. And so, you know, if you got your judgmental God, you pull away from him. If you have your loving God, you step towards them. Okay? And you have to have the Holy Spirit guide you which time to apply which verse. All right? So, whenever things become more important than people, idolatry has entered your life. And I mean, we like our things. We're Americans, right? I'm a card-carrying materialist. And, you know, you have to surrender that to the Lord. It's not, you know, for us Americans, being a materialist, we don't even think about it. It's just being American, right? But for the rest of the world, they don't live the way we do. They don't go into the grocery store the way we do. They don't buy whatever they want. You know, there was this one crossword puzzle that says, what makes a home? And you know what the answer was? Furniture. and no, I don't think that's what makes a home. But our stuff does get most of the attention. And if your happiness depends on your stuff becomes an idol. When you live for your stuff, you now have made an idol out of God's gifts. And you like the gift more than you pursuing the gift giver. One time I'm in the hospital. This woman is going to die unless God intervenes. And oh, Pastor, I'm so glad you're here. You know, I've had the Catholic priest here, and I've had, you know, my friend who's into self-realization, and she brought me this crystal, and I got all bases covered. And I said, well, you know, in Revelations 9:20, it says in the last day they will worship stones. And I think you ought to have one source, not, you know, all these, you know, she listed up every religion you could possibly have is covering her. I'm like, that's not how it works. When you're a Christian, you have one source, one healer, one heaven that you'll be going to if he decides not to heal you. I don't think you want to be holding crystals and believing in other gods when Jesus calls you home. Church-going Christian of mine. Okay? I don't know. She threw me out. And, she didn't throw me out, but, you know, sadly, and I don't know, she died. And I'm sure she went to heaven. But wouldn't you like to just be solid in the conversation with God when you're about to transition? Not hoping that your Hindu friend and your, you know, crystal and your, you know, whatever else it was that she was holding on to. You want to be in a relationship with Jesus, the source of life, the source of grace, the source of the person who's creating a place for you in heaven. And you don't want to let your religion become this smorgasbord of things. And you know, like the Unitarian Universalists, they believe in everything except Christianity. They'd say, yeah, we believe in Christianity too. But you'll notice when you talk to them, it is definitely, they find that to be intrusive. I think it's because it's the truth. And they'd rather be able to play with their spirituality rather than hold on to somebody who says, it matters how you handle Jesus Christ. Well, I'm getting off on one of my own soap boxes. And sometimes we turn God into the way we see him. You know, God made us in his image and we return the favor, made him in our image, right? We don't want a serious God. So we create a Santa Claus grandfatherly figure who, you know, appeals to our comforts rather than the force of passion and power and seriousness that the biblical God says that he is. You know, the biblical God that you take serious suddenly dictates your life. You know, when you see Schindler's List and he's just so passionate about saving another soul, another Jew, and he's collecting all of his money so he can hire these Jews to go into his company so that he could save them from the Holocaust. And the Germans are like, oh, I found an avenue of, you know, enrichment here. Yeah, we'll sell you Jews to work for the cause. He was trying to save lives. You know, and here's why I'm bringing this up. You know, the second greatest commandment is love thy neighbor as thyself. And do you get as passionate about justice issues and caring for people? Because that's really the second commandment, which is love, Jesus' second commandment, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And how do you do that? By making sure that you don't have any other idols except the heart of God that you're pursuing and that you care about. Well, we have fresh idols right now in our society. Tolerance, relativism. Okay, who are you to think that your belief is more correct than my belief? You know, everybody has access to truth, and truth is relative. Your truth might not be my truth. And so if we're not operating with the same truth, then it's kind of interesting. Our truth as Christians is being persecuted, bigoted, rejected, about to be persecuted in a heavy-duty way in the upcoming years. And are you going to withstand that persecution? Are you going to have one God and yeah, I'm willing to lose everything because I believe in the God of the Bible and I believe in the truths? I'm not calling good evil and evil good. What God says, that's what I'm standing on. We stand with compassion and grace. We communicate with love. We try to help people to see. You know, with this whole Roe versus Wade controversy right now, I'm listening to arguments and I'm getting into conversations and I'm finding that, you know, it basically comes down to my rights, and for the Christian, we forfeited our rights. We don't have the rights over our lives anymore. God does. And he gets to decide how we live our lives. And that kind of cuts off a lot of avenues. You know, and whether we're talking about abortion or illegal aliens and building a wall or, you know, whatever social issue it is, we kind of have to let the Lord get in the way of our politics. And he might say this to the left and this to the right. And it's important that we're allowing ourselves to be educated and redirected by the Lord. Right now, Christians will keep their political perspectives and hold them over their biblical perspectives. And I just don't think that's the right way to do life as a Christian. Okay? And you know, it's never safe to step into political conversations, but Elijah said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If it's the Lord, serve him. If it's somebody else, serve Baal. But make a decision. And you and I have made a decision that Jesus runs our lives. Jesus needs to be the controlling factor of our life. Okay? The first place, the authoritative figure. When we do our personal friendships, when we do our politics, when we carry out our Christianity, when we're by ourselves, God is the one we're trying to please and surrender to.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.